originally I went to St Bartholomew's, or St Bart's, but I went to what is now called the Old School. I just know that as school. It was a lovely time. I loved going to school, and in fact I can remember one occasion my parents wanted to take me out of school for some reason, and I cried until they arranged for someone to pick me up so that I could actually go to school that day. I was fairly good at most subjects at school, and perhaps that's why I enjoyed it. I was also a little bit of a goody two-shoes, so I was a bit of a favourite of the headmaster of the time, who was called Jack Briers, who's well known to a lot of people in Quorn. And there was an elderly couple who lived next door to the school, and they used to sell apples and eggs from their own chickens and trees, the way around. And he would sometimes send me round to them to collect his apples and eggs, and I would get a sweet from them for my troubles and come back. I can't quite imagine that happening these days. No. But I also remember we had sort of three playgrounds in a way. There was one at the very front of the school that we didn't tend to use, but there was one at the side of the school, or the back from School Lane, with a massive oak tree, and I remember collecting acorns there. And then there was a back playground which had netball nets on old metal stands, but there was also a boys' toilet block in the corner. And I don't think it even had a roof on it. But in the summer, it really smelled. It was horrible. The girls' toilets were always indoors, so that was a bit better. There was a corridor that had some sort of flooring on it. Bearing in mind this was the 1960s. And I remember a sign on the wall saying, "No stilettos to be worn on this floor," which seems weird these days. I do remember especially the wooden screen which was between J2 and J4, which was Junior 2 and Junior 4 classrooms. And it was on little wheels on a sort of metal runner. And there was a door in it, so every now and again you'd be in one of those classrooms and the headmaster would suddenly step through and say hello and have a conversation with the teacher. But that would be drawn back if we had choir practice, or just occasionally if one of the teachers had to be away for the day, they would join the two classes together and mingle and sort of work it out as we went along. We had orchestra practice in there. So it just became one big classroom when they needed the whole school to come together, basically.
So were you at were you sat at individual desks? Do you remember?
I do. In the infant side of the school, we had these sort of half, I guess they would be hexagons, six-sided hexagons. And there were half tables, so each half would have three sides, and they pushed them together to make a hexagon. And we worked at those. They were obviously very low little tables. And in the infant side of the school, we used to have our lunch on them as well, I remember. And we also had old-fashioned easels, so if we did art, we'd sit either side of an easel and a piece of paper would be clipped on, and we'd run away with the old paintbrushes and jam jars full of paint and water. And then in the junior side of the school, we had really old-fashioned bench desks, and they were double desks with the lift-up lids and the inkwells and a little groove for the pen. And the bench was attached to the actual desk part with a sort of metal hoop, almost, a curved metal thing that just joined the seat to the desk. I've well remembered sitting in those and looking at all the graffiti on both the top and the underside that had been carved in and coloured in with pens.
Do you remember how many students there were at the school at that time?
Oh, I couldn't say for sure. There were 3 infant classes and 4 junior. I suppose in the heyday there would perhaps only have had a maximum of 20 per class. But I do remember when I was in the final class, J4, people talking about the fact that there were 40 of us and how enormous a class that was. But I gather these days that's pretty much a normal sized class anyway. We didn't have things like teaching assistants. You had one teacher and that was it. But one thing I do very clearly remember in J4, I always had quite a clear reading voice. And in fact, when we had any sort of event like Harvest Festival, Christmas, we'd have a service at the church, and I was always asked to do readings because I could project my voice and read really clearly. And my J4 teacher, at the end of the day, we used to have a story, and she soon realised that I could actually take that role on. So she would sit me on her desk with the book of the time, and I would read to the class while she went off and possibly had a cigarette or a cup of coffee. I don't know what she was off doing, but she devolved her responsibility to me for the story at the end of the day.
So, with so many people, in the school, and it being relatively small, did you have a hall, or how did you get on for PE? And
we used to go down to the village hall in a crocodile, as it was called in those days. So in pairs, holding hands, teacher at either end, and we'd trot off along School Lane and onto Leicester Road and go to the village hall. So we had PE and sort of drama. We used to have barn dancing, that sort of thing. I even remember at one point that the Phoenix Theatre in Leicester came and did some theatre with us, and then we went and performed our little play on their stage in Leicester, which for sort of 10-year-olds or whatever we were was just thrilling. Very exciting, because Leicester felt like the other end of the world. And then for lunches in the junior school, again, crocodile style, we used to go across the Stafford Orchard, and then across Station Road, up Church Lane into the church rooms, and our lunch was served in there, and there would be about 6 to a table with a teacher, and it was all served up in sort of metal tin things, and served out by the teacher. And I can actually well remember one particular teacher who was a bit of a monster, trying to force feed me something I hated. And Jack Briers just happened to enter the room as he was trying to force a spoon into my mouth, and he bellowed from the door to the other end where we were, "Mr. Duval, a word, please." He'd tried to force feed several pupils before me. I don't think he ever tried to do it again.
Did you, for sports, when there were sports days, presumably in the summer?
Yes. Now, Jack Briers was very keen on his football, so we always had a football team, which I wasn't involved in. But there was one girl, and funnily enough, I seem to think her name might have been Scholes, which would ring a bell. I think there was a famous footballer called Scholes at one point. And she was also very keen on football, and Jack allowed her to play in the team, even though at that time various sports associations, I think, frowned on mixed teams.
You've been quite advanced to that.
Yes, yeah. But he was great, Jack. He would try and be as modern as he could, although it wasn't necessarily lost my words. Wasn't necessarily modern in other ways. He still used the cane occasionally. I can remember only boys, sexist time, but only boys were ever caned. They were caned on the hand, but I can remember being treated, if that's the word, to a boy being given 3 strokes of the cane across his hand for whatever misdemeanour. So we were generally quite well behaved in that school.
And did you take a 11 plus exam at that time?
Well, I didn't. We were gearing up for it, and then about 2 to 3 years before we were due to take it, the whole system changed. I believe Leicestershire was actually one of the first counties to do away with the 11 plus and go to a comprehensive system. And so we practiced for it, but never actually took it. It was an automatic change to the next school. So at 11 years of age, we went to Humphrey Perkins School in Barrow.
I went to the village school till I was 14. We all went till we were 14, and in them days we took the 11 plus exam, and if you passed you went to a grammar school, and if you didn't you stayed on at Quorn School till you were 14, and then from 14 to 15 we went to Humphrey Perkins for a year, then we left school at 15 in them days.
So were the evacuees with you at the school?
Yes, and the evacuees were older than us, and the name were Peter and Robin, and after the end of the war, several years after, they'd come back to see my mum, and my mum says to me, "What do you think, Stuart? Peter and Robin's been back to see us from London." And she said, "And what do you think they are?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "The bookmakers." So, but from my amateur brought 5 kids up with no bathroom.
Do you remember if their parents ever came to visit your mum?
No, they didn't. No, we never knew anything of the parents. But there were a lot of evacuees in the village at the time. The Gatehouses come, the Sunderlands come, and but we all mucked in together. And when the evacuees came to the school, these London lads, they didn't half liven us Quorn lads up. I mean, they were rough lads, but we all mixed and matched, and we all got on together. But for a start, they didn't half liven us up. They were rough lads, these London lads, compared with us. We were soft as grease, and they really used to shake us up. And the teachers at the school had a job with them and getting discipline from them as well. But they were all good lads. And Albert Gatehouse still comes to see me every Christmas.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, he does. Every Christmas he comes up and sees me with his wife, and he's still alive, and the others are dead. But Albert and they lived in Brook House. You see, Brook House were took over during the war for evacuees, and there were the Sunderlands, there were Gatehouses, there were 4 big families lived in Brook House, and. They were rough lads, but they were honest and they were good, and we all got on at the finish.
Talking of the teachers at the school, were there any teachers that stuck in your mind?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we had the teachers then, you see, we had Miss Horspool, you see, and Miss Sterling, and then the headmaster was there was Mr. Galen, then before that, the headmaster for a long time was Mr. Ruxton. And I always remember Mr. Ruxton because he was the last of the caners. Mr. Ruxton used to hand 6 of the best out on a regular basis. And when Mr. Ruxton left the school, Mr. Galen came in and he was a non-caner. So...
And did you get the cane?
I had it once and I never thought I'd ever get the cane. And what we used to do, as we lived in Sarson Street, all the lads from Sarson Street and Orchard Estate, we used to walk through the churchyard to the village school with a tennis ball down, playing football as we went along. And when we came down by what is now Bradley's, in them days was the Co-op Bakehouse, there used to be an old lady in a cottage there, and she used to get on every day. She said, why do you keep playing football when you're going? And she used to be at us all the time. And one day, me and this other lad went to the letterbox and shouted through a letterbox. And she followed us to school, across the Stafford Orchard to the school, reported us to the headmaster. I didn't know this. And after assembly, the headmaster says, "Will Turner and Lee come to my study after we've finished?" I knew what that was for. So I said, "Mrs. Holbein has reported you for shouting through her letterbox." Now, the theory was amongst the lads, if they give you the cane, if you just drop your hand nicely like that, you don't get the full force. But he didn't work out like that. He had a black stick, Mr. Ruxton did, and he held my hand with one hand as he hit me with the other. And there were 3 in each hand, and Michael Lee, who went in and had 6 with me, he cried, and I nearly cried. It really did. The cane did hurt, and it's the only time I ever had it, but I never forgot it.
So what did were there playtimes at school?
Yes, there were always playtimes.
Were you was that in the playground?
You see, during the war, we used to have free milk as well. We used to have 1/3 of a pint of milk each. But the playground there was always a match going on in the playgrounds. We soon got a football match going in the playgrounds. But they were happy days, really. But there was one thing I always remembered, and I never really forgot, because everything was very quiet in our school. And I was in Miss Horspool's class, which was Junior 2, and Mr. Ruxton came round, and all of a sudden, there was a lot of cheering from J1. We couldn't understand it because everything was quiet in the club, in the school. And then Mr. Ruxton came in, to our class to say that Germany had just surrendered.
Wow, yeah. So that's why everybody was so happy.
And everybody got the desktops and banged them and all got on. Because we'd had 6 years of war and Mr. Ruxton come to say Germany had just surrendered. I remember that day.
So did you get a day off then? Or?
No, there were no days off, but we remembered that. I remember Mr. Ruxton come to say, Miss Horsfall, that I've just come to say, children, that Germany surrendered.
It must have been a fantastic time.
It was a big day that
Yeah. And I suppose for the whole village as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'd had ration coupons, we'd had planes coming over to bomb Coventry, you see, and the occasional bomb drop. There were bomb dropped in Woodthorpe Fields. There were 1 or 2 dropped like that, and there was a plane come down on what was Moorfields Farm, which was my brother's farm later. But a plane come down there, and us kids all went up to see the plane.
It was still there.
Yeah.
Was that a German plane?
No, it was a relatively small plane, but it was a big event, like to see a plane come down in the field at the local farm.
Do you know if the pilot was all right?
No, I can't remember that now, but I do remember when Mr. Uxton come and told us that the war had finished.
So presumably you had gas masks?
Oh yeah, we used to take gas masks to school. We all had to have gas masks, and you see there were shelters built all up where they've knocked them down now, but if you went up to the playground, the first gate, if you went up to that one, there was all shelters, they're air raid shelters, you see.
Right, yeah.
And if the sirens went, you see, to say the Germans were over, as frequently they used to do, then we all had to go into shelters and take the gas masks with us.
But so did you just used to sit there in that time? Or
but we didn't. You see, what happened, the Spitfire was made in Coventry. The Spitfire was made at Coventry.
Did you go to the village school?
I did, yes, the old village school, yeah.
Do you remember your first day there?
I do remember. I remember the first time Mum took me down there. We went down, and when we first started, we used to have to do half a day on a Friday. I think that only lasted for a week or two, and then we was off full time. But yes, I remember walking in there, the first door, which is now the entrance to the cafe, and that was Infants 1. And I remember going in there and standing at the door and thinking, all these children in there, and the teacher one side. But then it was okay, because I saw my best friend Michael Bradshaw, who was sitting down there, and he waved to me, so I thought, this is going to be all right. So in we goes then. So that was that. And then I do remember then it was the first day or two we went there, and they'd got all the alphabet letters on the wall. I remember us all sitting on the floor, and we was having to do the alphabet, and each letter had got a drawing against it like A, and it had got an apple there. So I do remember that was the first thing that we learned, the alphabet.
And do you remember your teacher?
Yes, it was Mrs. Wesley. She was really quite sweet, and she was little, and I thought she was very old, but she might have not been. But yeah, I do remember her.
And what about the activities at the school? Did you get involved with sport there at all?
Sports? I know we had a sports day, and I can remember doing some running, which we used to always use the Stafford Orchard area as the playing area there. But I can't remember a lot of sports activity. I can remember things we did, the painting, the sandpit, and we used to have a rocking horse, which was good fun. But sports days, I don't think there was really quite such a big emphasis on it then. Probably is now, but because we was always spend a lot of time just running around anyway.
Like at playtime, was that the school playtime, was that within the grounds, or did you go into Stafford Orchard for that?
No, Stafford Orchard was more for particular games. There were times when we played on that. But there were times when we had to stay in the main bit. And if I remember rightly, the infants stayed on the front bit, and then the ones in the junior section were in the bit at the back of the playground. I think they did keep us a little bit separate.
And did you used to go home at lunchtime for meals, or did you have meals in the school?
Yes, no, don't ever remember there being any facilities for the meals there. We used to walk home, always walk to school and walk back, and on our own as well. I can remember from when I was about 5 that used to take myself to school and back.
Yeah, that's interesting. When did you leave the school, and where did you go for secondary education?
Humphrey Perkins.
I was brought up at this local school, sent me with my father, which is now finished, of course, and I had a Welshman, Teacher Jones, headmaster, jolly good chap, ex-army man, major, discipline and all that, singing, Welsh. I remember the Quorn Hounds when they used to meet at Quorn Cross.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
How big was the hunt then? It must
They
be.
couldn't do that now.
Yeah.
The Quorn Hounds, I can't remember them being in Quorn. The Quorn Hounds left Quorn in 1907 and went to Barrow.
Oh, I didn't know.
That's when they left.
Yeah.
Before my time, you see, but they used to come and meet here. Couldn't do that now.
Did children used to go out and it must have been quite an event when they
Oh yes,
Yeah.
the village turned out.
Well, when you were at school, you said, what was the discipline like? You said
Good. As I say, this chap was ex-army man, enforced discipline. All treated the same, no matter which family he came from, rich, poor. Jolly good chap, Jones.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Was it mixed, boys and girls?
Beg pardon?
Was it mixed school, boys?
Yeah,
and
mixed, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So what ages would you have been there?
Well, I started there when I was a kid, you see. I started about 4 and a half and left when I was 14.
And when you left at 14, you went?
Came on my father's milk business, you see, automatically.
So a bit about your child. Do you remember any of the games you used to play?
Well, we played football then, didn't we? And 1 or 2 games in the streets. You could play football in the street then. Just 1 or 2 carts, Coleman's, Bakers. No motorised traffic then. I remember the first bus going through Quorn, Pass from Leicester, Green.
Or a motor bus?
Motorbus. Coming over that bridge, as you approach Loughborough to that cross, a wheel came off.
To school, your first day at school?
Yes, I do. My teacher was Mrs. Wesley, and she had learning cards on the wall with numbers and objects to say the number, and I had to go and point to how old I was, and mine was 4 feathers. That's 4.
So, and did you have any friends when you went to school? Did you go with friends, or were you on your own?
No, because we were quite new to the village. Yes. Well, my brother was there. He went a few months before me, so.
So he would have been in the same class?
He was in the class above me, but in those days what happened, if you were bright, you got moved up a class. So they moved me quite quickly to be the same class as him. So then we went through the whole school together, and then at the end they said I couldn't go to Humphrey Perkins because I was too young, so I had to do 2 years in the end class.
Did you enjoy your time at school?
Loved it. Yeah.
Did you participate in any sports or anything?
Only the usual, running, and loved the athletics day. Plenty of skipping in the playground, that kind of thing. No, I don't remember doing anything. Not then. I was always a keen and very good swimmer. I learnt actually at that school, and I went on to that carried on throughout my life, the swimming. But no, not.
So where did you actually go to swim? Because there wasn't.
Granby Street Baths.
Oh right.
Yeah, they used to take us on the coach.
Right. Yeah. So that was quite an adventure, I guess.
Yeah, it was an adventure. Yeah.
Did you suffer from any illnesses at all when you were at school?
No.
And what did you do at for meal times? Lunchtime. Did you go home for?
Well, I did go home. Trevor and I went home, but then we found out later on when Mum went on to have more children that we were entitled to free school dinners. But I was thinking that on the way down that things were so much more lax then, because I'd decide one day I'd stay for school dinner and the next day I'd go home, and then I could just do it.
So did they actually have the school meals in the school at that time?
No, they were in the church rooms, which was just a stone's throw away from our house anyway. So I'd go walking with them going to school, and I think, oh no, I'll go home. Go home instead.
So they didn't go looking for you, I think, where's she gone?
No, they didn't. This is the weird thing, they didn't. It's strange.
Did you have to wear a uniform when you
No.
were at school?
No, most of the girls wore like a pinafore, but it wasn't a specific design or anything.
No. Did you do a 11 plus exam or equivalent?
No, but I remember we did something called the 9 plus. I think 11 plus had already been abolished or was being abolished, but we did something like a test at the end, and they said it was 9 plus. I have no idea whether that came to anything. I don't know what it was about.
No. Did you, so when you had to leave the school, was that at 9 when you left the primary school?
No, 11.
And then you went to...
Humphrey Perkins in Barrow.
Did you used to walk, Phil?
Yes, clearly. I can remember my first day at St Bart's School.
Really?
Because there was yes, the reason I can remember it so well is because I went along to school not knowing where I was going, and and when I got there I found it quite sort of unusual because there were all these children around, and most of them I didn't know. And one of them, his name was Brian Marshall, who was a little lad who ultimately turned out to be one of the rogues of the school.
Really?
Was actually spent the entire day bawling his eyes out and being cuddled by Mrs. Holmes, the teacher.
So Mrs. Holmes was your class
She was
teacher?
my first class teacher. Yes, I can remember them all. Mrs. Holmes was my first year. Miss Wesley was my second year. Miss Bailey was my third year. Mrs. Green was my fourth year. Mr. Cook was the, I've lost count, fifth year. The next one was Mrs. Manclark, but Mrs. Manclark went off on maternity leave. We didn't know that at the time, but and we got various stand-ins as well. And then finally, in what we now call Year 6, was Miss Sturman, Mrs. Sturman, who was she was dreadful, dreadful woman.
Why was she dreadful?
She was so strict.
Oh right,
but frankly, with a load of 11-year-olds, she had to be.
Yeah.
But we all sailed through it because we were all reasonably clever, and we sailed through it unharmed, shall we say.
Do you remember who the headmaster or headmistress would have been at that time?
Yes, the headmaster when I went to the school was Mr. Gaylon. Now, Mr. Gaylon eventually became a councillor for Charnwood Borough Council.
Right.
He's now sadly left us. And then, but when Mr. Gaylon retired, we ended up with a gentleman called Mr. Bryers, Mr. Jack Bryers.
Right. Yeah.
And Mr. Jack Bryers, I can tell you, came to the village. I don't know where he came from, but he actually ended up living next door at number 17 as a lodger while his house was being built in the village. He had a new house built on Woodhouse Road, and he and his wife lived next door with Mr. Cook, who I mentioned previously. He was one of my teachers.
Oh, right. So were you taking apples round to him? Or your pears?
I actually didn't need to because the pears dropped over onto his garden anyway. He could help himself.
So when you say that, it was quite strict, or the last teacher particularly was
Yes,
quite...
she was very strict, but she had to be.
Yeah. Was there corporal punishment at the school that time?
Oh yes, you could be sent to the... sorry, do you want to stop? Yes. Sorry, are we still going?
We're still going, yes. Yeah.
Yes, there was... yes, corporal punishment was issued regularly, but only by the headmaster.
Right, yeah.
So you were sent to the headmaster.
Yes.
And he dealt with you.
Right.
But I never had to go there.
No. Good boy, yes.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
No. So, do you remember at the school, Phil? What were the conditions like at that time? I mean, did they have heating and lighting and all the?
The heating was big coke stoves, coke fed, very warm. I can't recall ever feeling cold. We were always nice and warm. Toilets were another issue. The boys' toilet, which no longer exists at the school now, was open air.
Right. Yeah.
It was just a walled area, and you basically went and stood at the wall and did your business, and then that was it. And if it was raining, you got wet. So they were a bit archaic.
Yeah.
Yes, electricity was in the school. That wasn't. I can't recall a problem.
No. So what years would that have been that you were there?
I started at St Bart's in 1952. So I would assume it would be the autumn term. So September of 52, and I left in July 59. I was there all that time.
Were the classes quite large? Do you remember? Or
yes, they would be. There would be the order of 30 odd in each class. I mean, I can't remember exactly.
No.
But we stayed as a class right the way through. I mean, this was prior to the days when children, perhaps in this day and age, special needs children tend to get held back and do another of the same year. There was none of that.
No,
we just moved as a group. So when we left after the end of year 6, we'd been together all that time.
How did you get on, Phil? Do you remember? Was there physical education and sports activities?
Yes, there was, but it was fairly basic. I mean, Mr. Cook, I remember, led most of the sport at school, and he was a passionate footballer. And I don't know whether that was what did it, but I've hated football all my life. I never enjoyed it.
No.
Never enjoyed it. I mean, I have to say I watch it now, but I would never want to play it.
And what did the girls play then at that time?
Girls played. There was an active netball group. They played netball. The other thing about girls is that they tended to play things like hopscotch and skipping. There was an awful lot of skipping, and in the playground. And the other thing I remember about girls is they always wanted to play snobs, the old game of snobs, which boys never got involved in. Boys were generally footballers, but unfortunately I didn't like football.
No. Yeah. So did you have to? Was it something you did after school? You had to do it in school time?
During school time. If Mr. Cook said we're going to play football, you had to play football. You didn't have a choice.
No. What about because the whole the school, was there a hall in the school or
no, just classrooms. There was no hall. In fact, what we would now call year 6 and year 5 classrooms were only separated by a huge wooden screen that slid open, and when we had assembly every morning, this screen would be slid open, and the entire senior school, that's years 6, 5, 4 and 3, would be assembled in these 2 rooms, and woe betide you if you ended up in one room, because one room was wider than the other, so when the screens opened you could end up sitting in the corner behind a wall not having a clue what was going on.
And so presumably you couldn't there was no canteen or anywhere to go for meals at lunchtime?
No, there were at lunchtime you had 2 options. You could either go to the school dinners, which were provided elsewhere in the village, or you stayed at school and assembled in one room and had sandwiches which your parents had packed up for you. And I did, or you went home. You could actually go home.
Right, yeah. And what option did you use?
Well, I did all three.
Oh, right.
During my time there, I did all three. But the school dinners were we used to have to walk in crocodile fashion with the staff up to what is now Allen House. It used to be known as the Gentlemen's Institute building, and where dinners were prepared for us. And the one thing we all hated was the boiled swede, which we had every single day. Winter or summer, all I can recall is boiled swede, and nobody ever had any.
Yeah. What about for pudding? Do you remember that?
Well, I have to be. I can't recall puddings very well because what I haven't told you is in 1952, at the end of 1952, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Oh, right.
School, or the beginning
well, I
of
didn't like it. I didn't want to go to school at all.
Why not?
Oh, I'd never been used to mixing with the children, you see. But anyway, the children round where we lived in Wood Lane, they used to go and collect the milk from a farm, might have been Peppered. And I said to my mother I'd like to fetch some milk. So she got me a can, bought a can, and I used to fetch that. And I got mixed in the children then.
So
the infant governess, her name was Miss Corlett, she lived opposite the village school, and she was rather strict. She'd say she was going to give a penny to the child that had got the cleanest shoes. Well, I had clean shoes every morning. My father polished them, and I was very disappointed because I didn't get the penny. But he said, she gives it to them as only has them polished when they go into a penny. I can remember that.
Can you remember anything about what sort of lessons you used to have, what subjects you had?
Yes, the headmaster, he was a big churchman. He was the choir master at the church. Well, we was nonconformists, you see, and really, as a child, I could sense they didn't like the nonconformist children, not like the church. They favoured them the best.
Because it was a church school.
Yeah, oh yeah. Now, it changed, you see, to a what do they call it, comprehensive, I think. Well, they built another one now, but we used to have a stove in the middle of the room with a pipe going up for heat. And I never remember anywhere to wash your hands, and those toilets was pan toilets at that school.
Yes.
Yeah.
What lessons had you used to have then? Can you remember?
Yes, I can remember. To start with, we should sing a psalm. I learnt a lot of psalms with him being the church choir master. When I have them on the radio now, I remember them singing them at school. And I had to teach a boy who was very backward. I had to teach him to read. Oh, I did feel awful. I felt so embarrassed. He was a big fat lad, and I had to have him sitting against me, teaching him pat and cat and all them mat and that. But I done it, had to do. And there's one thing as I remember always. When we had a scripture exam, a man came to talk to us like, and he picked on a girl. She was my age in my class, and she lived in Barrow Road. He asked her to say the Lord's Prayer, and she couldn't. All I know as a child I went home and told my mother it were awful to me, things couldn't repeat them. But then she hadn't got a home like I had. Her father were a drunkard and there was a big family of them. My mother told me, she said, well, she's not like you, not so lucky. But I always remember that. We had cookery lessons at one time, yeah. And we used to...
What sort of things did you cook?
Pardon?
What sort of things did you cook? Can you remember?
Yes, I can. Stew, and we used to make all sorts of puddings, and they had some desiccated coconut in the cupboard, and we used to go and pinch a bit, and once it was dark, and we put our hands and we got a handful of lard. Serve you right, Mother said you shouldn't do such things.
Did you were you shown how to look after babies, or how to sort of do any cleaning or washing or anything?
No, not at all, no.
What about sex education? Did you have any sex education at school?
Not at all. No. I didn't know a thing till I went to work about anything. No. I was really innocent. Well, I learnt a lot since I've been here in the paper. The things has happened. I mean, and what the children